Other people, I am proud to have family and close friends who are nurses. I'm the daughter of a midwife and the sister of a neonatal nurse, and acutely aware of the incredible work nurses do. And I was delighted to join them on the picket line in Tallaght today, because the work they do, Minister, is among the toughest and most vitally important work day in and day out, which is undertaken by any group of people in this country. So, Minister, do you accept that not being able to find adequate numbers to work in the nursing profession presents an overarching health and safety concern, a crisis and an emergency? Do you understand, Minister, that if one works in a system where pay is too low and where conditions are in vast need of improvement, but crucially there is no sign of change, then why would one stay? Because that is what nurses face. And finally, Minister, as I said before, our nurses are second to none, but the system is failing them and their patients. It is primarily a matter of pay, of justice, of fairness, of equity. But pay is at the heart of this dispute. And for government to make an offer through media, an abysmal offer to settle a pay dispute by excluding pay from negotiation, is inflammatory, idiotic and insulting, and shows grossly poor judgment and a worrying absence of any understanding of their plight. So, Minister, will you admit that that statement was insulting and was wrong and apologise for it? And will you commit to engaging in a meaningful way with the General Secretary of the Nurses Union?
Thank you. Deputy Shortall.
Look, Minister, sooner or later this dispute is going to be resolved. For everybody's sake, patients, staff, and for the government's sake, the sooner that happens, the better. Now, you've said earlier on that you're prepared to engage. What you need to do, though, both ministers, is to send a very clear signal that employers will engage in an honest endeavour in this, and that you must send a signal that there will be no preconditions. Everything must be on the table. It will be sorted out sooner or later around the table, but you must give a very clear signal here this morning and make a clear statement that everything must be on the table, no preconditions.
What we cannot put on the table is the stability of our collective wage agreement at the moment. If that changes, there will be immediate consequences for every other public servant in the state. And while, of course, I appreciate the fact that we have many nurses here this morning who I know would rather be in their place of work, the challenge that I will immediately face, and that Minister Harris will face, is if this wage agreement is destabilised, the same galleries will be full with other public servants who will want to benefit from the same change. That is the challenge we face. Now, in fairness, there are some in the House for whom that is their agenda. And Deputy Boyd-Barrett, Deputy Smith, Deputy Kenny, I think you've acknowledged that the changes that you want to see happen for nurses, you want to see happen across the rest of the public service as well. Yes, for the reasons I acknowledge. Now to answer, sure.
In the context of the current agreement, that's what I'm asking.
Thank you. Okay. No, can we let the Minister respond now, please?
Thank you very much.
Please.
So just to respond back, therefore, back to the questions that were put to me, to deal first with the question that Deputy Martin put to me there, in relation to the figures that are there and what they say in relation to recruitment and retention. The figures that have been shared with us and developed by the HSE and the Department of Health do make the point that over the last number of years we have seen 3,876 more nurses and midwives. So that change has happened. It also makes the point that within that workforce at the moment, and this came from the report of the Public Service Pay Commission, that turnover rates at the moment, excluding retirees, stand at 5%, and including retirees stand at 6.8%. So that's the other side, Deputy, to the figures that you've put to me. And as I said about our willingness to engage, which also put the question to Deputy Shortall, what we are willing to do, of course, Ceann Comhairle, is we are willing to engage in the machinery of the state, whether it be the Labour Court or the Workplace Relations Commission. But the key condition that we need to adhere to is how we can preserve an overall agreement that is in place.
Okay. Can we have a final response then, Minister?
Yeah, thank you very much, Ceann Comhairle. And to acknowledge the contributions and questions that have been put by all deputies here this morning. I do want to respond back, however, to one particular allegation that has been made here across the morning in relation to the nature of the current wage agreement, and the assertion that I have heard from a number of speakers here that we do not have wage restoration or we do not have wage growth in place. And the agreement, as negotiated at the moment, does provide for the fact that during this agreement, anybody earning below €35,000 is going to see wage increases, which they should, which they deserve. It does ensure, contrary to what some have claimed, that anybody who's earning less than €50,000 will have their wages fully restored by 2019. And the current wage agreement does ensure that anybody earning less than €70,000 will have their overall wages restored to €70,000 by the end of 2020. So the claims have been made that we are not budgeting for or implementing wage restoration or wage growth for some are not true. That is happening, that is underway and part of the current wage agreement. In relation to the questions that have been put to us in relation to new entrant pay and how we are looking to respond back to the challenges around there, again, the current wage agreement has in place provisions to ensure that anybody who's participating in that agreement could benefit from up to €3,000 from the negotiations that we have concluded with the Public Services Pay Commission of ICTU in relation to that. So again and again this morning, I've heard claims that we don't have an agreement in place that doesn't tackle the agenda of wage restoration. We do for low and middle income workers, and the agreement that we have in place makes provision for looking to deal with the issue in relation to new entrant pay. A charge that has been made here, and I've dealt with some of the other ones, is again the claim that has been repeated by deputies here this morning that there's 4 vacancies for every 1 applicant, and this is a figure we've heard much of. This is based on an article from April 2017 that in turn had its origin in the Global Jobs website. The actual figures that came from the Public Services Pay Commission said that on average there is 2 applicants, 1.86 applicants for every place on a recruitment panel. So that is what is happening. That is how people are responding back to those who want to work in our public services and want to gain work there. But of course, what Minister Harris and I have acknowledged in our contribution is, in addition to both of us emphasising the understanding and respect that we have for all who work in our public services, and in particular for those who work in our health services, what we've also looked to sketch out is the competing claims that we have and the challenges that we have in relation to this. And I will end on this point, which is a core point for how government has to respond back to this. It is not at all clear to me that if this wage agreement and this collective wage agreement comes to a disorderly end, how we will be able to negotiate another one to take its place. And if that happens, that has consequences for our public servants and how we pay for them and how we ensure they get the wages that they deserve and that they are entitled to in the future. And I would make the point to my colleagues in Fianna Fáil here this morning that it was due to their efforts and their leadership at another point of great change in our economy that they showed how collective wage agreements could play an essential part in how we can manage wage pressure and how we can ensure public servants are paid fairly. And it is one of your legacies, and a positive legacy, that showed that wage agreements and collective wage agreements ensure that we can pay people by reference to what they earn as opposed to their position of leverage. You showed how that can be made work, and we also went through a period in which we saw how it didn't work and we had to deal with the consequences of that. And again, you use collective wage agreements to respond back to that. A bitter legacy will be reaped if we find ourselves in a position that any government in the future is not able to negotiate a collective wage agreement for over 300,000 public servants in our country. And that is why this is such a difficult matter. I understand fully and I appreciate the great support that our nurses and the nursing unions have. But it is because of the value of these agreements that this is proving such a formidable issue. But Minister Harris and I will continue to work in the Workplace Relations Commission and in the Labour Court to see if we can find a way through this.
Please, Deputy. We're moving now to leaders' questions. We're now moving to leaders' questions.